Welcome back. My name is Yaram John, and today we'll be talking about Singapore family office scenarios for Korean HNWIs based on case studies. Now, let's bring our discussion to life with real-world scenarios. Imagine a Korean entrepreneur family considering Singapore for their family office. In case 1A, this family, still resident in Korea, structures its Singapore family office to fully leverage the fund tax incentives under Section 13O or 13U. We set up a Singapore incorporated fund, say a private limited company or limited partnership, and hire a licensed Singapore fund manager so that all designated investment income is exempt from Singapore tax. In practice, this means the fund itself pays 0% Singapore tax on gains and dividends, subject to meeting MAS rules, of course. For example, a Korean HNWI with about 10 to 20 million to invest might use a 13O fund because then the fund would owe no Singapore tax on gains or dividends. Dividends paid out of that fund are likewise tax-free in Singapore because of the one-tier system there. The only tax bite then comes from Korea. Under the Singapore-Korea Treaty, dividends received by the Korean owner can be taxed in Korea, but at a cap rate, typically up to 15% withholding. In effect, the family pays almost no Singapore tax and only limited Korean tax on distributions. And we call this a near tax neutral structure, which means the earnings grow untaxed in Singapore, subject only to the local Korean personal tax on any amounts repatriated. The design logic here is quite clear. We give the family a clean, tax-efficient investment platform while anchoring real operations in Singapore. To claim the incentive, the family office must meet MAS's substance requirements, for instance, employing at least 2 Singapore-based investment professionals and spending on Singapore operations and so on. This costs money and effort, but it does avoid the risk of being treated as a hollow shell. From a Korean perspective, having a fully staffed Singapore fund also helps demonstrate substance reducing any exposure under Korea's controlled foreign company rules or anti-avoidance scrutiny. So in short, Case 1A sacrifices some convenience for big tax savings. We gain full tax exemption in Singapore, but the trade-off is committing to real offices, managers, and compliance in Singapore. Now, let's compare that with case 1B, where the same family decides not to use the incentive scheme. Perhaps they just want the simple governance benefits of a Singapore structure, and maybe they are willing to pay the tax for easier setup. And in this scenario, we could still put the investments in Singapore, say via a private limited or a trust, but without 13O or 13U status, the entity pays normal corporate tax. A Singapore company pays a flat 17% tax on its profits. Only after that taxed income are distributions made to the owners. When dividends flow to Korea, they are again subject to Korean tax under the treaty. In practice, case 1B means the family pays 17% in Singapore. Then whatever Korean tax applies on the post-tax proceeds. There's no Singapore withholding, but effectively the family forfeits the $0 tax rate of case 1A. The benefit of case 1B is reduced complexity. They avoid MAS application and substance obligations, but the trade-off is higher total tax. So to put simply, under case 1A, which we do use incentive, and 20% Singapore dollar fund pays 0% in Singapore and up to 15% in Korea. And under case 1B, where we use no incentive at all, the same fund pays 17% in Singapore and up to 15% in Korea on the remainder. That's a roughly 17% of profit extra burden. So as a result, some families ask, is it worth meeting all the MAS rules just to save 17%? Well, the answer depends on priorities. If the family's goal is primarily tax efficiency, case 1A wins. If they are more concerned with simplicity or they can't realistically staff a Singapore office, they may reluctantly accept case 1B's higher tax. Notably, our choice of scheme also reflects fund size and strategy. As experts note, small single-family funds on the order of 5 to 20 million Singapore dollar typically go for 13.0 because it has the lowest entry bar, while only very large or multi-family funds, hundreds or millions, justify 13U's higher 15 million Singapore threshold. The new 1308 scheme for limited partners caters to families wanting partnership flexibility. In our case 1, the size points us to 13.0. So, from a design perspective, we are aligning structure to goals and scale. This also means we recognize the risks avoided. By using the incentive, we mitigate the risk of double taxation on investment income, and by genuinely staffing the office, we avoid MAS or Korean tax audits that might question an empty shell. The risk in case 1B, however, is higher tax and potentially being plain vanilla. Without the incentive, the Singapore vehicle looks like any normal holding company. Now let's move on to case 2. Our second scenario is different in motivation. Mr. Lee, a Korean citizen, has moved abroad, say to Europe or the US, and wants a family office for global investing and long-term succession planning. He too sets up a Singapore family office, but now emphasis shifts. Being non-resident of Korea, he's less worried about Korean tax on investments. It may not apply at all, actually. But instead, he focuses on legal stability, global connectivity, and protecting his family's legacy. For Mr. Lee, Singapore serves as a central hub, a politically stable, well-regulated base from which to direct a global portfolio. It still offers tax benefits. The family office fund can apply the same 13.0 or 13U scheme so that investment income earned 0% Singapore tax, but the bigger draw is estate planning. Korea has very high inheritance taxes, up to 50% on large estates. By contrast, Singapore abolished estate duty in 2008. We will place Mr. Lee's assets into a Singapore trust that owns the shares of the family office entity. This achieves a continuity. If Mr. Lee passes away, the trust keeps owning the family office, so there's no painful probate process. The children, as beneficiaries, simply continue under the trust's terms. This structure also lets Mr. Lee define exactly how wealth transfers across generations. As one specialist notes, a family office without a trust alone is insufficient to achieve succession planning. A trust gives the possibility for a client to plan how these wealth and management powers should be distributed to the next generation. Moreover, consolidating assets under this trust umbrella protects wealth. Creditors or divorcing spouses cannot easily claim against trust-held assets, whereas individually held assets would be vulnerable. The trust framework also supports philanthropy and governance. In short, the family office becomes not just an investment vehicle, but the heart of a family's multi-generational strategy. The cost is complexity. Maintaining a trust and family office in parallel means coordinating two layers of investment management, but the risk avoided. Forced heirship, fragmented ownership, or ruinous estate taxes makes it worthwhile for a globally mobile Korean family. So in Mr. Lee's case, even if he is not taxed by Korea anymore, he still benefits from Singapore's tax neutrality. Under the DTA, any dividends from the Singapore fund are still exempt in Singapore, no extra tax, and capital gains in Singapore remain untaxed. If he invests in US or European markets, those jurisdictions will tax gains or dividends as usual. But our Singapore office can structure vehicles, for example, via 13U, to minimize further leakage. Ultimately, governance and succession drive the design for case two, with Singapore chosen as a cooperative partner. No inheritance tax, strong legal systems, rather than as a loophole. So, what do these cases teach us? The difference between a tax-motivated approach and a governance-driven approach to family office planning is profound. In case one, the Korean resident family was focused on squeezing out tax benefits. They weighed two technical paths, with or without AMA's incentives, and saw this as a cost-benefit exercise. In case two, the expat family used Singapore mainly to solve family governance challenges. So tax incentives were welcome, but it was actually secondary. In practice, a purely tax-chasing mindset can lead to brittle structures. Singapore's 2025 reforms make this very clear. Incentives are only for families who truly commit to local substance. The MAS now insists on concrete factors, minimum AUM, multiple investment professionals, and local spending. And all of these are to prove the office is real. As one expert observes, Singapore's tax schemes reward those who establish real operations there. So, in other words, if you try to skirt the rules, you lose the benefit. By contrast, a governance-first strategy values the family office as an institution. It builds robust legal vehicles like trusts and management practices that endure beyond any one country's tax policy. The family office becomes the family's enterprise, defining decision rights, preparing the next generation, and protecting wealth. Tax efficiency then follows almost as a happy byproduct. So we structure it so that as much profit as possible is reinvested. And indeed, most of the investment profits a family office manages can be tax exempt under Singapore's regimes. So to give you the message to our high net worth audiences, the insight is this. Plan your family office for substance and succession, not just for taxes. In Singapore, you can enjoy world-class legal stability and even zero tax on fund income, but only if your office is genuine and well-run. That means hiring talent, running real operations, and integrating estate planning, and so on. The families that thrive are the ones who put governance first. The extra compliance is not a burden, but insurance against future risk. So it protects the very benefits we see: tax efficiency, asset protection, and legacy. When a family designs its family office as a governance engine, the tax breaks becomes a durable perks rather than fragile loopholes. I hope this gives you the lesson. Thank you.